Well, welcome back to part two. I'm going to go straight in with the questions. And Kathy, I don't know whether you go to model railway shows, but if you do go to a model railway show, what are you looking for? What interests you? What catches your eye?
I look for something that is different. I like new stuff. I like different stuff. I was saying that earlier. So I look for something that just excites me, whether that's some really good weathering, whether it's a good design of how the layout has been fasciated and put together. One person had a old saw that they put their name on for a logging layout. Somebody else did a corrugated iron top, like it was part of a building. So I look for something just a little bit quirky and original that can inspire me when I get back.
So are the actual locomotives and the trains secondary for you?
Well, I'm a scenery person at heart. I do love some styles of locos, but if it's just a generic sort of, train running through, it's the landscape that will excite me more than the train. I'm not that excited by, it's another black steam loco.
Yeah, I think that splits people through the middle, really, because when I've been at shows exhibiting or just watching, some people just walk straight past my layout. They're not interested. Others want to spend half an hour looking at it. And I think that's just the way people are.
Yeah, everyone has something different. And we were talking about how it's a great hobby because there's so many skills you have to learn, but there's also so many branches you can sit happily in and find your niche. So if they call it plywood Pacific in the US, but if you're somebody who doesn't want to do scenery, you can build your plywood Pacific and it doesn't matter because it's just as valid as a fully scenic slice of life on a specific day with only the right number plate on the car and only the styles that would have been worn on people in the little figures and the right loco down to the right, every number running through. Both of them are equally valid.
Yeah, okay, that's good. And what we've got here is a virtual show. And we did the first one last year for the Engage Forum simply because of lockdown and COVID. But I'm just starting to wonder, and I don't know whether you think the same, but do you think virtual shows are the way forward? Or do you think the virtual show and the actual shows, the real life shows, are going to sit along side by side?
I love absorbing YouTube videos and watching stuff, but it is a very passive way of absorbing your hobby. If you go to a show, you meet people, you talk to people. And I always tell people who are starting in the hobby, get into a club and find some real people. Yes, you can put your work on the internet, but you get I find there's an extreme. There's a lot of very, very complimentary comments. There's one or two rude, misogynist, horrible, whatever comments, most of which if they're offensive, I delete, but most I ignore. There's always someone who will criticize your work. But what none of them can do is actually see your work in real life. And they can't come up and go, why did you put the siding there? If you'd swapped it over to the other side, you'd have had room here for this. Or why did you do that? Preferably before you've fully seen it. But, or why are you doing this in this section? Or have you thought about doing X? Because they're seeing it in real life. In social media, it's a curated set of photos and videos that people are showing off the best of their layout. And as a result, it's not the real life of what your layout may actually look like for a huge period of its time. People say, well, your layout's brilliant. I look at my layout and go, 99% of it isn't done. There's like 2 sections that are finished. Yeah. So somebody coming up who's not a model railroad person goes, that's brilliant. The architect did when he was looking at the loft room the other day. And I'm like, it's all been ripped out down this side. I'm taking out all the stuff I can reclaim. It's fascinating what the disconnect is between what you see and absorb passively and the avenues you can explore when you're actively having a conversation.
I think that's interesting. Go on, Mike.
I don't think videos do a model railway justice. If you see the real thing, it looks completely different to what you see in a video.
Yeah. And part of that is down to people's skill as videographers. I mean, it's the bit I hate least like, let's go with that, about my current job is trying to make something look beautiful after the fact when it's a postage stamp size and I've got a plain white backdrop behind it. And when you're doing a video, when a photo, you can Photoshop in a backdrop, but when you're doing a video, you can't do that. So you either end up printing things or painting things which don't look as good. I struggle a lot with just making my work look really good afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I do this for a living. You know, if you're just a guy with a mobile phone, it's often quite a shaky video, or it just isn't lit that well because you've not thought about lighting it for photography and videography. And it can be really hard to show off all the excellent work that's there. And one thing I'll say is people who light from above, quite often the front section of their layout is almost in shadow. Yes. If there's not many lights in the room at that point. So actually the bit they want to show off most is often one of the hardest bits to see, and that's where they put the most attention. So I think lighting should push forward a little bit if you can, or you have very little in that first inch or two that's more shadowed. It's difficult though, and you know, we can't all be brilliant videographers. But I mean, I look at the people who are the real greats in the hobby, and you can spot their photos a mile off because they just have a certain style and they look really good. I wish I was at that level.
So I think you're saying the two are going to sit side by side.
I think there's validity to both. You will never make it to all of the shows in the country, let alone the world. So you'll never get that inspiration of watching someone from the Far East with a completely different take on something, do something perhaps that you've done a million times, or something from a different country with a different style. And so it limits your options if you only ever see people within your own clique. And I think the beauty of the internet is it opens you up way beyond that and exposes you to so much more, which can really trigger new ideas or new directions.
Right. And talking about that sort of thing and scenery, we obviously model in Engage, and I think earlier on you said that you don't get involved with that. From your perspective, do you think it's easier to model in N or harder? And the reason I say that is because I think you can get away with a bit more because it's so tiny. People don't notice the imperfections so much. Yeah.
And that again depends whether you're doing active viewing with somebody in your room or you're taking a photo, because in a photo, they don't know what the scale is, and you will fill the building into the same amount of photo as you would on a HO layout, but you've only got half the size to detail it in. So automatically your mullions will look bigger on your windows. Your weathering needs to be a lot finer. You can do it, but if you're doing the same size layout in N as you were in 00, you've got to put a lot more effort in if you want to take a photo of a close-up. If someone's just viewing the layout from a distance and they're coming in, it's normal viewing in your layout room or an exhibition, you can get away with it. But I think too many people in N go, oh, I can just get away with not detailing that. And actually, with a little bit more effort on, say, but it's so hard because it's so small. You know, you can't buy scale grass in N scale as easily as you can in HO, for example.
And it gets harder the older you get.
Yeah, I get bigger the older I get, and take my glasses off.
And the other thing we've got to consider is the structural strength of it as well. You can't go down to an actual scale size.
Yeah, very much. This is a real problem. And I know there's a train of thought that's really into fine scale modeling. If I've got chunky windows, so I've used a Walther's modular kit or something, I'll always paint them black so they don't look as big, which on industrial buildings you can do. But if you're modeling residential and you're doing a house, those white mullions on a window can really look chunky, and it can just blow the sort of whole illusion out on something really simple. And there's no real way around it without becoming too fine, or perhaps painting them, because actually, why are you modeling them anyway when they're that small? Maybe just painting them onto the acetate is a way of getting a thinner line. It's all very difficult though. And for what I like doing, which is scenery and detailing, I like bigger scales than even HO or 00, because it's just easier to see and to put the detail in. Having said that, I do a lot of 1/100th in sci-fi, or 1/87, 1/76, and they're all about the same. It gets you a bigger scene in, and it's a bit of a trade-off. If you do a 6th scale figure, for example, there's no way you can build them a whole house without it starting to take over yours. So N scale's perfect for getting real estate in and doing big vistas and getting really brilliant deep scenery and having trains running through landscapes. It's only when you want to go to those close-up photos that it becomes a lot harder. So it depends whether you're doing a industrial switching layout where everyone's taking, you know, close-up photos and has its other challenges in N, or whether you're doing mountains with, you know, one track running through it where it becomes a lot easier.
I think I better.
And talking of scenery, when I've seen some of your videos, Kathy, I like the way that you quite often start off by taking a look at the real world and what something looks like in real life. And I sometimes see other people's layouts and I think they haven't looked at real life. And I think that's important.
People often ask me as a beginner, what tips can I give them? And my biggest tip is always go look at photos of the real thing. Don't copy another model. I can look at trends of modeling. Certainly in the US, George Celius was a very, very inspirational guy to a lot of modelers. And I can look at someone who's inspired by them because their layout looks just like a George Celius layout. They don't always look like real life though, because they're over cluttered and they're almost the best bits of a kind of a city, or the most interesting bits, the dilapidated bits. Not every building is run down. Not every building is weathered beyond belief. Everything was new once, even in the Depression era for America. So there is something about, you need to have a look at real life, but you're always going to cherry pick the bits because we're doing a model. We can't afford to just model eons and eons of open space that there is in reality. But it is about having that balance between negative space that lets your layout breathe a little and cramming everything that you want in there so it becomes almost a pastiche of a town or a city, because they don't actually look like that. And by the time you get down to the weathering level and things like that, I mean, I see people that weather in all sorts of weird colours and I look at it and I go, oh, that rust looks almost pink. Okay.
Like bright blue sea, isn't it?
I hate bright blue sea. And there are countries, and I've just done a bright blue pool, but it's a jungle waterfall in the tropics. And the actual colour, probably boosted in people's Instagrams, for a lot of people on the photos of it, is that kind of bright blue. And it looks good because it's a jungle pool. I would never do a sea in the UK blue. I'd do a turgid grey at best. And I probably wouldn't model bright sunshine particularly, and that's where you see the blue. So yeah, water shouldn't be blue in my view, unless you're actually, it's like tree trunks aren't necessarily brown. Okay,
thanks for that. But time's running out very quickly, so I'm going to ask you. I'm going to finish off with the obvious question here. Did you enjoy doing the Model Railway Challenge? And as a sort of aside to that, I think that show has brought model railways and railways in general to the wider public quite nicely, and also programs by people like Tim Dunn and Rob Bell are helping to do that. And so you think TV is starting to take model railways and railways in general more seriously or not?
More seriously, I think the train spotter anorak on a platform stereotype is still around, but it's diminishing. I think there's a lot of interest in crafts now. Generally, people have always loved miniatures, but you're seeing miniatures generally come more to the fore. And across that swell of modeling, I was listening to a podcast earlier today and they described it as a river. And each one of these branches of modeling is like a tributary coming in. So you've got everything from military modeling, and I love looking at military modeling for their weathering because they do superb weathering, railways. And I think that there's a whole groundswell of that whole river is going up, and model railways specifically have gone up quite a lot in the UK. But that was a couple of years on TV. Lockdown has had a really positive impact as people looked for hobbies, and it's for us to work out how that then carries forward over the next 4 or 5 years rather than losing that momentum.
And did you enjoy the show?
I did, yes. Yeah, it was really good. It was great to spend 8 weeks filming, just watching so many great modelers. And so much of what they did wasn't even shown. It's beautiful modeling on there. I would not want to take part though. it was rushed. It was really hard work for them. And I think some of them found it quite stressful. Other of them were just really chilled. But they did an amazing job, every single one of them.
One of the things, just a final question for me, one of the things that always occurred to me was, one of the things I struggle with sometimes, particularly at our club, which is very cold, is you paint something or you glue something and you go back 2 days later and it's not dry.
Mm-hmm.
So how did these people manage? Did you have sort of fans and things to get everything dry, or did they just sort of make the best of it?
Some of them had fans. Most of them chose methods that used better ways of, less watery ways of doing things.
Right, yeah.
They had to, it was something they had to think about. If they were doing resin, they had to pick a resin that didn't take 3 days to set. Yeah. And they had to do it at night and then leave it covered the next morning. It was the summer. Some days it was like an oven in there. It was really cold on other days. It's a British summer. Who knows what it's going to be like? It was damp. There was one little leak out the roof, which thankfully missed a layout. But, all the layouts got stored between. So when they came to the final, they'd been stored in a shed and they all had to be brought out. There may have been a bit of knocking and sort of back and forth. So there was a lot of challenges for them and they had to think about it. And a lot of people did things that worked really well. And then when the camera turns on them, they stopped working. So it was a real shame in some ways. And yet other people did stuff that I thought that will never work. The running a train through water. I thought it was short. I never thought you could run a train through water, and they actually ran it through a good centimetre of water, half an inch. And I was just like shocked it actually ran. I couldn't believe it. Really couldn't. So I learned a lot.
Yeah. Would you do it again?
I would. Everyone keeps asking me about series 3. I don't think there is one planned at the moment. I've not heard anything. And I think COVID knocked it, but it wasn't picked up at that point anyway. So unless it comes back in a new guise, in which case they'll probably have new judges and everything as well, and a slightly new concept. But I don't see that coming back because Channel 5 just didn't get behind it in the second series. So it didn't really get enough. They didn't push it. They didn't really sell it enough. And they moved the time around so many times. It became hard for me even to work out when it was going to be on. So yes, I don't think that shows an indication they want to do it again.
Okay, so Mike, have you got anything else you want to ask before we wrap up?
No, not for now. No, I think.
No. Okay, so we'll just take this opportunity to thank Kathy for her time, just thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great to chat to you both and talk a little bit about railways.
Excellent. Okay, thanks.